The night Cora Veld nearly died in a gas station bathroom off the Trans-Canada, she was thinking about a spreadsheet. Not her life. Not the 4 years she'd spent clawing her way up from filing clerk to the only accountant Harmon Syndicate trusted with the black books. Not even the man who'd put 2 fingers on her wrist in the parking lot 2 weeks ago and said quietly, "You know too much to be this careless." The spreadsheet. Column D, a discrepancy of $11,000 that had been bothering her for 6 days. She found out later that Rook had been looking for her for 40 minutes before he thought to check the bathroom. His driver said he stood outside the door for almost a full minute before he knocked. Cora thought that was the most human thing she'd ever heard about him, and she'd been working for the man for 3 years. She didn't hear the knock. She was on the floor between the toilet and the heating vent, which was the warmest spot, and she'd been pressing her jacket against her side because the cut wasn't deep, but it wouldn't stop, and she was running the numbers in her head. Blood loss, time, whether the nearest hospital in this part of Ontario would ask questions she couldn't answer. The door wasn't locked. She'd been too dizzy to lock it. Rook came in and stood there for a moment in his coat, looking down at her, and his face did the thing it always did when something didn't fit his calculations. "It went very stealth," he said. "It wasn't a question. It wasn't anything, really. It was the sound of a man revising an equation. My car's in the lot," she said. "3rd row. Don't tow it." He crouched down, not in a hurry, just lowered himself to her level the way he did everything, with a kind of deliberate economy that meant he never wasted a movement. He looked at her side. He looked at her face. He looked at the jacket she was holding, which was soaked through and ruined. "How long?" he said. "Hour and a half." Something moved in his expression that she couldn't name. The Holt job. Someone knew the timing, the exit route. She watched him process that. "I got out. They didn't follow me past the 400. You should have called. My phone's in the car." She paused. "Also, I didn't want to." That was the truth. She'd been sitting on the floor of that bathroom thinking about the $11,000 and half deciding she'd rather bleed out quietly than make a phone call that would put her further in debt to a man who kept debts in a ledger she'd never been allowed to read. Rook stood up. He took off his coat and folded it on the edge of the sink, and then he took off his jacket and rolled up his sleeve, and Cora saw the scars on his forearm, the old ones, the ones that made a kind of map she'd never asked about. He opened the cabinet above the toilet without asking and found a first aid kit, which she thought said something about the kind of gas stations he frequented. "This is going to require stitches," he said. "I know. I'm not going to take you to a hospital. I know that too." He looked at her for a moment. "You're not afraid. I'm too tired to be afraid." Something shifted in his face. Not warmth, exactly. More like recognition. He knelt down beside her and said, "Move your hand." She did. He had a property 40 minutes north of the station. She didn't know about it. In 3 years of managing the Harmon books, she'd accounted for every safe house, every registered asset, every shell company in 3 provinces, and this place wasn't in any of them. She filed that away, the way she filed everything. The house was set back from the road, surrounded by birch trees going bare in the October cold, and the driveway was gravel that crunched under the SUV in a way that felt very far from anything. Inside, it smelled like cedar and disuse. Someone had been there recently enough to turn the heat on, not recently enough for it to have made a difference. Rook set her on a leather couch in what might have been a study and disappeared for 15 minutes. She heard him on the phone, not the words, he'd moved out of range deliberately, but the tone, which was the flat, precise tone he used when he was issuing instructions that were not open to interpretation. She looked at the room. Books on the shelves, real ones, not decorative. A desk with nothing on it. A window that looked out at the birch trees and the grey October sky. A framed photograph on the wall of a coastline she didn't recognize. He came back with a kit that was better than anything in that gas station cabinet and a glass of water and 2 white pills. "What are those?" she said. "Ibuprofen. That's it. I don't keep opioids in a house I use alone." He set the water on the table beside her. "I don't trust myself with them. That was the second human thing she'd learned about him in one night. She took the pills. He sat across from her on the coffee table, which was not a chair, and which meant he was closer than he normally allowed himself to be, and he worked on her side with the careful attention of someone who had done this before. Not to other people, she thought, to himself. "You're going to tell me about the discrepancy," he said. She blinked. "What discrepancy?" "Column D, you've been running the numbers in your head for 6 days. I can tell because you go quiet in a specific way when something's bothering you in the books and you think I haven't noticed." She stared at him. "You noticed. I notice everything about the people who handle my money." He tied off the last stitch with a precision that made her jaw tighten. 11,000. Tax holding account for the Briar Street property. It's been moved twice in the last month. I've been waiting for you to bring it to me. I wanted to be sure. You are sure. You've been sure for 4 days. He looked up at her. His eyes were very dark, darker than she remembered, though she wasn't sure when she'd started cataloguing the color of Rook's eyes. "You were deciding whether to tell me. I was deciding whether it mattered. Everything matters in this business." "I know." She looked at the window. The birch trees were silver in the dark. "I was deciding whether you were the one moving it." The silence that followed had a particular quality, not offense, not anger. More like the moment when a very still body of water gets a stone dropped into it, and the ripples haven't quite reached the edges yet. "And?" he said. "The second transfer was on a Tuesday," she said. "You were in Montreal. I checked the flight records and the hotel and 2 separate invoices with timestamps." She paused. "It wasn't you." He looked at her for a long time. "You were protecting yourself. I was gathering information. Those are the same thing." He stood up and put the kit back together with those neat, unhurried movements. "Who do you think it is?" "Pennick," she said. "He has access to that account, and he was in the office both Tuesdays, and he's been asking questions about the Briar Street property that don't fit his file." Rook went very still in the way that was different from his ordinary stillness. This was the stillness that meant something was being decided. "Pennick has been with me for 7 years, he said. "I know, he's the one who recommended hiring you. I know that too." She watched him. "Does that change what I just told you?" He looked at her. Something moved through his face that she couldn't track. "No," he said. "It doesn't change anything." He set the kit down. "You should sleep. I'll take you back in the morning." She didn't argue. She was exhausted in the bone-deep way that came after adrenaline and blood loss, and 6 days of carrying a problem alone, and the couch was warm and the pills were working, and she was asleep before he turned the light off. She woke up at 3 in the morning because she heard him on the phone again. The house was dark except for the light from his study, which was down the hall. She lay still and listened to the quality of silence around the voice, which was very different now from the flat, directive tone. This was quieter, older, somehow the tone of a conversation being had for the last time. She understood without hearing the words that he was talking to Pennick. She closed her eyes. She didn't go back to sleep for a long time. In the morning he made coffee in a kitchen that was almost aggressively spare. No art on the walls, nothing on the counters, a single mug already waiting beside the pot for her, and he stood at the window with his own mug and looked out at the birch trees and said, without turning around, "He confirmed it. I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Are you?" He turned then and looked at her across the kitchen, and his face was the way it sometimes was in the office when he'd just finished a calculation he didn't like the answer to. Settled, resolved. "You've been with me for 3 years. Yes. You handle accounts that could put 12 people in prison. Yes. You found the discrepancy before my financial director did, before anyone did." He looked at his coffee. "And when you found something that might implicate me, you built a case first. Quietly. Alone. I'm not in a position to make mistakes," she said. "I never have been." He looked at her for a long time. She held it because she'd learned, in 3 years, that flinching cost more than it saved. "Question you from," he said. The question surprised her, not the words. She knew where she was from, Thunder Bay, a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, her mother's precise and lovely handwriting on the back of grocery receipts, math homework done at the kitchen table while her mother worked nights. She was surprised that he asked. Thunder Bay, she said. Family? No. He absorbed that. How did you end up in the books business? I'm good with numbers, she said, and I don't have a record, so I passed the background check. She paused. Also, I was broken. Your financial director made the offer the same week I got evicted. He almost smiled. She'd seen that almost smile twice in 3 years, and each time it surprised her like a loose step. I'm going to restructure the accounts, he said, after panic. He set his mug down. I want you running the primary books, not reporting to anyone, reporting to me. She looked at him. That's a different position than the one I was hired for. Yes, it pays differently. Yes, it also means a different level of exposure if anything goes wrong. Yes, he said, in a tone that meant he knew she understood what he was offering and was waiting for the rest. She looked at the birch trees. They were gold in the morning light, which surprised her. She'd thought October had taken the color already. I want the Briar Street property in the trust accounting, she said. All of it, not just the holding account. A pause. That's a significant ask. You're asking me to be significantly exposed. He studied her. You already know what's in it. I know what's been reported, she said. That's not the same as all of it. The silence stretched. She was used to his silences. They had texture. This one had something in it she couldn't categorize, a kind of careful attention that felt different from how he normally looked at people who worked for him. All right, he said. She nodded, picked up her coffee, looked out at the birch trees. I need to get back, she said. I have a 9:30 call with the Hamilton account. You were stabbed 14 hours ago. I know. I'll bill the recovery time. She paused. If that's how this works now. It is, he said quietly. She looked at him. He was still watching her with that unnameable expression, and for the first time in 3 years she didn't immediately look away. Rook, she said. Yes, the man who tipped off the Holt job. It wasn't just panic. He went still. Explain. The timing was too precise. Pennick didn't know the exit route. Only 2 people knew the exit route, and one of them is me. She set down her coffee. You should look at whoever briefed the extraction team. She watched him run the calculation, watched it land. You knew this last night, he said. I suspected it last night. I'm telling you now because I've had time to be sure. Why didn't you tell me immediately? She looked at him steadily. Because last night I didn't know if you'd trust the source or eliminate it. Another silence. The longest one. Outside, a crow landed in one of the birch trees and considered them both through the window with the supreme indifference of a bird that had no stake in the outcome. And now, he said. Now I have the Briar Street books, she said. So, I'm harder to eliminate quietly. He looked at her for a very long time, and then, for the first time she could remember, he said something that wasn't an instruction or an assessment or a calculation. He said, You're the most careful person I've ever employed. I'm the most careful person you've ever met, she said, and this time he actually smiled. A real one, brief and almost involuntary, the way a door opens when someone on the other side pushes it without meaning to. She went back to the city. She took her 9:30 call from the passenger seat of his SUV while his driver navigated the 400 South, and she answered questions about the Hamilton ledger with her jacket folded over her side, and her voice completely level, and her mind running 2 calculations simultaneously, the one the Hamilton account needed, and the one she'd been building since she first noticed the discrepancy in column D. Rook sat beside her and did not speak. He didn't look at her, either, or not in a way she could catch, but twice in the 40-minute drive she felt his attention shift to her face in a way that had a different weight than professional. She noticed. She filed it away. She'd always been good at knowing what things were worth. The office was on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district that didn't look like anything. That was deliberate. Most of what the Harmon operation looked like from the outside was nothing at all. That was her job, to make the real numbers invisible inside the ordinary ones, to make the books read like a company that did exactly what it said it did, and nothing more. She went to her desk and opened her laptop and pulled up column D. The discrepancy was still there. $11,000. It would need to be addressed now, because Pennick was no longer in a position to be addressed, and the account he'd been using would go cold, and she'd need to run the correction through 3 different sub-accounts before it became invisible. She started the correction. It was going to take most of the afternoon. At 2:15, Rook appeared in her doorway. He did this sometimes, stood in the doorway without speaking. Most people found it unnerving. She'd decided early on that the easiest way to deal with it was to simply keep working. Eventually, he either said something or left. Either way, it resolved itself. This time he said, "The extraction team briefer." It was Souls. She didn't look up from the screen. Souls has been running internal logistics for 2 years. Yes, he's organized and punctual, and he knows every route in and out of the city. She paused. "And you never quite trusted him?" "No," he said. "That's why you handled the Holt exit differently than the brief." She looked up. "You gave the extraction team a route you'd changed at the last minute and didn't tell Souls." He watched her. "Which means," she said, "the ambush was based on the old route which Souls knew, and I nearly bled out in a gas station bathroom because of a test you ran without telling the person who was most at risk." The silence had a different texture this time, not the calculating kind. Something rawer than that. "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at her screen. "The correction's going to take 3 hours. I'll need the Briar Street access by end of day. Cora." She stopped. He'd never used her first name. In 3 years, in this office, he'd always said Veld with the flat precision he used for everything. She looked up. His expression was not quite like anything she'd catalogued in 3 years of watching him calculate. It was the look of someone who had run a risk assessment and arrived at an answer that surprised them. "I should have told you," he said. "Yes," she said. "You should have. I won't do it again." She held his gaze. She said, "Because the next time you run a test without disclosing it to me, I walk. And you know what I know, so you understand what that means." "I do," he said. "Good." She looked back at her screen. End of day on the Briar Street access. "I have a lot of corrections to make." He left. She heard his footsteps down the hall, unhurried, and then the close of his office door. She finished the correction in 2 hours and 40 minutes. When the Briar Street access came through at 4:45, she opened the full account for the first time and sat very still for a moment, looking at what was actually there. Then she put on her reading glasses and got to work. She was still at her desk at 7 when she heard his office door again, his footsteps, a pause outside her door. "Veld," he said. Back to Veld. She noticed. "There's a restaurant on King Street," he said. "They have a table at 7:30. She kept her eyes on the screen. "Is this a business dinner?" A pause. "No." She saved her file. She took off her reading glasses. She considered the question from a few angles, the way she always did, turning it over to see where the liabilities were. "I have conditions," she said. "I assumed you would. No more tests without full disclosure. Already agreed. The Briar Street books stay with me. Permanently. Already agreed." She looked up. He was standing in the doorway with his coat and his careful stillness, and the faintest sign of something behind his eyes that wasn't calculation. "The restaurant," she said. "What kind oysters?" he said. "If that works." She hadn't had oysters since before the eviction. Before the 2-bedroom apartment above the laundromat, even. Before the grocery receipt math homework, and the mother who worked nights, and the spreadsheets she used to do for fun, because numbers were the one thing that made sense. "That works," she said. She shut her laptop. She picked up her jacket, the ruined one she'd have to replace, and she stood up, and when she walked past him through the doorway, she was close enough to feel the warmth of him, which was not something she'd catalogued before. She started cataloguing it now. Some debts, she was beginning to understand, weren't in any ledger she'd been given access to. Some of them were written in a different kind of column entirely. The kind you didn't notice until you were sitting on a gas station floor at midnight, bleeding quietly, thinking about numbers, and someone knocked on a door you hadn't had the presence of mind to lock. Some debts went both ways. She was good enough with numbers to know what that meant.